Thank you very much. And firstly, thank you everyone for joining. We've got a great session today, some great topics that we're going to talk about, everything self-service, and more importantly, how to operationalize self-service in the right way for your stores and your customers. So we're going to start off with a topic that's very close to my heart. Your POS data is telling you you need self-service, how to look into your data, what to look for, how to interpret it, and how to make decisions around your self-service strategy off the back of it. Second topic will be your customers expect payment innovation. We're going to talk everything payment. We've got some great stats from the market in terms of trends, but also what consumers are demanding and expecting from payment options. Our third topic is going to be how to safeguard against self-service theft. It's a big topic at the moment. We've got a lot to talk about, both in terms of operational, but also innovation. Our fourth topic is going to be how to mix your assisted checkout with self-service to transform the experience in your stores. It's a great topic. It's one we get asked quite a lot. So we're going to talk about everything surrounding that kind of process. And then finally, what you should do now. If you want to start embarking on a self-service journey, or you want to develop your offering that you currently have, what are the steps you should take? So the first topic we're going to talk about is your POS data. What's it telling you? You need self-service. And with that, I'm going to pass over to George, who's going to take us through some market trends. George, over to you.
Thanks, Matt, for the introduction. I think we all know, we've seen this widely reported, that what people really want is a frictionless experience, frictionless checkout. You know that when you use Uber, you don't even know that you've paid. And we've all seen exactly what's been going on with Amazon Go, the idea of you being able to pay for what you have taken without really having the experience of the transaction, the dull bit. So what's around this frictionless checkout? How do we know that people really want it? On the next slide, what we'll see is that actually your POS data tells you about this. Your POS data is, I think of this, the T-log or POS data, as really a kind of a treasure map. So if you're able to look at, for example, the size of the basket, the smaller the basket, the more frequent the trips, but also the more the propensity of people to pay with very simple non-cash and ideally contactless, that really tells you on the treasure map. So if they're using a lot of cash, if they have large baskets, probably going to be assisted checkout. Less cash or even no cash at all and smaller, more frequent baskets, that tells you there's the treasure waiting for you there in self-checkout. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, interestingly, when we ask people, we ask retailers in particular, what do you really want from your payment providers? Notice number 2 there, and notice how much this has increased. That what they're really looking for is customer insight and business intelligence. So yes, of course, they want to integrate with the applications, but retailers already know that the payments themselves, so they know the T-log treasure map is there, but they know the payments themselves are telling them something about the customers and how they ought to interact with them. And let's go on to the next slide. Now also, notice here something happening in grocery. Notice how much people are shopping in different types of grocery stores. We'll see in a minute, it's about the change in their behavior. Nobody's doing a weekly shop anymore. People are less and less interested in frozen or, let's say, packaged goods. There's a massive change towards fresh or perimeter items. And that's really driving smaller baskets, more frequent trips, and different types of retailers as far as grocery and convenience goes. Let's go on to the next slide. So what's really involved in helping them to do this? I'm going to hand back to Matt to talk about this.
Absolutely. Thank you, George. So what we see, or what conversations that we typically have with when we're working with retailers is, how do I put the right combination of self-checkouts into my store? How do I put the right checkouts into my store for my customers to fix whatever business issue I'm trying to solve in those stores, and generally get to the level of customer experience that I'm trying to get to? And I think we've all seen that self-service checkout, both installation and adoption rates have really increased quite dramatically over the last couple of years. And not just in the traditional geographies where we see the highest densities, or the formats that we typically see the most, i.e. grocery, but actually it's now being deployed more and more in new geographies and in different formats. Fuel and convenience is a great example, general merchandise, fast fashion, but also new segments. Now, the IT landscape keeps getting more and more complicated. We have more and more touch points that we could put into our stores. And that makes it much more difficult as a retailer to understand what the right solution mix is for your stores.
Just before you leave this slide, I wanted to say you're exactly right, about the fast fashion. We've seen this all the time, that people, actually the kind of demographic that's shopping there wants to do self-checkout, and they're using contactless, and they're looking for a quick experience, an Amazon Go-like experience. Sorry to interrupt, Matt.
So, sorry, cut me off mid-flow there. So it's increasingly difficult to find the right checkout mix for your consumers and the heightened consumer experience that they're demanding, but also to find the right balance from an operational perspective. And that's why at Diebold Nixdorf, we've created what we call the advisory services. So the three kind of key business drivers that we get asked most by retailers in regards to self-services: how can I make my in-store operations more efficient? And that doesn't necessarily mean cutting staff out of the stores to create a business case, but it means taking staff away from processes that customers could do via a self-service machine, so they're freed up to add value to other areas of the store. And the way I always get retailers, or ask retailers to think about it, is self-service is not an enabler to cut staff out of your stores. It's an enabler to free up members of staff to go and deliver customer experience in other areas of your store. So if you get your checkout experience and operations right, it has a knock-on effect of the customer journey the right way through the store. Number two, as I mentioned already, is how do I increase the customer experience? I think the number one customer bugbear in stores is having to queue. So how can we deliver the most efficient customer experience, the most efficient customer mix that's going to deliver the quickest throughput, the best experience? In turn, you're going to get reduced queues, happier customers, and hopefully more repeat business. And then finally, of course, we all have to create a business case. How do we deliver the best total cost of ownership for my stores? So how do I balance that mixture of operations and customer experience, so I'm delivering on both, but I'm providing a TCO to my business that's going to be suitable? So the nub of or the foundation of our advisory service is really built on data analytics. As George mentioned, the answer to all of these questions usually lies within your own data. So we've created a cloud-based analytics model that allows us to take your data, customer data. This is purely transactional data. We can put it into the model very quickly and easily, and then we can filter the data very quickly, as you'll see on screen here. Karen's going to click through some of the filters. So for example, we could say we only want to focus on basket sizes 0 to 10 items per transaction. We only want to, on top of that, look at card-only transactions. And you can see the model automatically filters the data so you can look at specific customer types or specific customer journeys. That allows you to then apply a particular technology to that actual customer. So what this allows you to do is effectively run a paper pilot using your transactional data, change your checkout configuration in the store by targeting specific transactions at specific technologies. And you can really drill down to a very granular level of detail, right down to your basket sizes focused on particular technologies. So you can really dissect your data to find the optimum solution mix and deliver on those customer journeys and total cost of ownership, as well as balancing operations within your store. So this tool is a a great way of effectively demonstrating the business benefits of different combinations of solutions tailored to each particular store. So gone are the days where we're just going to roll out a standard format of 6 self-service checkout and 10 point of sales to every single store. You can actually tailor the checkout approach to each particular store. Now, the good thing about this model as well is, depending on how you want to build up your business case, whether it's customer experience or increase in revenue, or reducing labor or redistributing labor, it'll also pump out a business case. So as you'll see on the next slide, based on what you're trying to achieve and what your business drivers are for deploying self-service checkout, we can actually filter the model to demonstrate the benefits of these solutions up front. So you run the paper pilot within the model, you can find the optimum checkout mix for your particular stores, and this is with 0 disruption to your stores. We are then much more confident that when we do put the solution into the store, it's the right solutions for that particular store, because we've run through the different scenarios in the virtual environment. Okay. Next topic, your customers expect payment innovations. George?
Okay, Matt, yeah, so your analytics are a little bit like a metal locator to go with that treasure map. They tell you where to dig.
Absolutely.
Let's go on to the next slide. Now, one of the things here, this is data that we collect from retailers, and we do this pretty much every quarter, and ask them what they're really investing in. I noticed, yes, of course, at the top, they're interested in mobile engagement with consumers. That's pretty hard to do, because consumers don't want to download another mobile app. They might do it with PWA, perhaps. But notice this, the number 2 item, and see how important it is checkout and payment technologies. You'd think, wouldn't you, that checkout is something that's old and doesn't need to change, but it has to change because people's shopping behavior is changing. The other reason that retailers always give us is that this is a very important touch point, that the store, and in particular, personalization in the store, is more important than anywhere else. So I just wanted to put that data in front of you to show you how important checkout and payment technologies are to retailers, how much they want to invest in them, and the reason why they care about that. Let's go on to the next slide.
Okay, so I just wanted to highlight a bit of a use case that we found, and this really came off the back of working with a retailer using the analytics services that you've just seen, particularly looking at payment type. So this particular retailer, they were traditionally a cash-based business, and they were only really looking at cash-based solutions. And what we actually found when we analyzed the data was that at peak periods of the day, they knew they had queues built up in the stores. The propensity for customers to pay by card rocketed. So customers appreciated the fact that when it was busy in the stores, there was a queue behind them, they were under pressure, they wanted to get in and out of that store as quickly as possible. Using contactless for the smaller transactions or card-based payment method was recognized by customers as a quicker way of getting through that store, and so they would much rather pay with card than with cash. So that was a great example where we used the analytics to actually highlight an area of the retailer's business that they hadn't appreciated before. And I think that the underlying message here with what George has said and running through this process is it's about giving customers choice. We would never ever suggest that you take out all of your checkouts and you put in one type of self-service checkout or one type of checkout, because customers value the choice. And it's really about giving customers the choice to check out in the way that they want, at the speed that they want, on the device that they want. Self-service won't be for everyone. Some customers will always use point of sale. Some may want to use mobility, but finding that right checkout mix for your customers in your stores to deliver the right technology for them is really the key message here.
But also, Matt, the thing is, it varies by day and by time of day, doesn't it? So the point you made there, that's why your analytics is so important. What I always find is the lunchtime rush is when people really value that self-checkout. They want to get their stuff and get out and get back to their desk.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go on and look at let's go ahead. Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say absolutely. So the other thing that you should look at is not only time of day, but time of the week, but also time of the year. So seasonal shopping really has a big effect on what technology you should put in the store. So it's important to look at as broader level of data as possible, and not just a particular week or a particular day.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay, we'll finally get off this slide and on to the next one.
Absolutely. So next up.
Go ahead. Okay, let's talk a bit about self-checkout and theft. People call it loss prevention, but I prefer to be blunt about this. What retailers worry about, and not just retailers, I mean, a lot of people worry about the fact that this might be tempting people to really just steal. And of course, for a long time, people have been using smart scales. Those are common everywhere. And we all know stories about people who perhaps have cheated those scales. Perhaps they scanned a cheap bottle of wine, but they put an expensive bottle of wine in their bag. Or a wonderful story here about some people who found that potatoes and steak weighed exactly the same. And so they recorded as potatoes when actually they were weighing steak. In some other countries, they have different approaches to this. So random checks are used in Russia. I can't imagine those being very popular, let's say, in the United States. Facial recognition, of course, we know about the new retail in China very much using facial recognition and using cameras really to try and encourage people to be more honest. Same thing in Sweden, where they have completely unattended stores, but you're being photographed all the time. I think what's really changing now is that AI is moving the intelligence to the edge of the network, and actually the cameras that are in the store and cameras over these self-checkout devices, they can learn what good behavior is and what suspicious behavior is. So in fact, Walmart is using this and many other retailers as well, and it's really imitating Amazon's walkout technology. It uses this so-called computer vision that tracks the item and tracks the behavior of the customer as well. Let's go on to the next slide. That's not to say that we don't sometimes see people getting very angry. And in fact, just where I go to pick up lunch here in London, I think every single screen there has been cracked by somebody because they weren't able to scan or weren't able to get the self-checkout machine to work effectively. Let's go on to the next slide. And it turns out that research shows that shoppers justify their theft if the experience fails them. Why might it fail? First of all, the barcode might be unreadable. Why might it be unreadable? Well, we just talked about the rise of fresh. A lot of these barcodes might have been in cool and maybe perhaps damp conditions. So it's important that that should be thought about. The other thing, and this is a real classic, is poor item master maintenance. So where you're using intelligent scales, they're looking at the item master to understand what is the weight of this item. And very frequently, that data is not kept up to date, and that creates massive frustration, and it causes, in the end, some degree of loss or theft. What else might happen? Poor maintenance of the mechanical elements. So things like receipt printer and particularly the change machine need to be regularly looked at. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, so theft or how to prevent shrink, particularly at self-checkout, is a conversation that we have quite a lot. And there's a couple of different ways that you can try and combat shrink within your store. The first one that we really suggest is really to get the in-store operations right. And we have a tool that we use to help retailers with this that uses virtual reality. So as part of the analytics advisory services, when we're looking to find the right mixture of solutions for your stores via the virtual environment, we can actually take a flat PDF floor plan of the store, and we can populate it in a 3D environment. Now, what that allows us to do is actually drag out the checkouts or the number of checkouts that we want to remove from the store and replace them with the combination of checkouts that the analytics tool has suggested is the most optimum. Now, what this allows us to do is then play around with the in-store operations of those solutions. So we can look at different options for where the units should be positioned within the store, where they should be positioned within the checkout front end. That has a huge effect on the utilization of self-service checkout. We can put them into different orientations within the store and play around with different layouts depending on the in-store operations or maybe even the format of the retailer. For example, if you're putting self-service checkout into a DIY retailer, you're going to need a lot more space around the self-service checkouts because of the nature of the customer journey and the items that they're buying. They're big, they're bulky, and you've usually got larger trolleys. So we can play around with those layouts. We can also look at things like queue structure. So queue structure is a really important one, particularly in stores where you have queues that build up at certain times. You can position impulse merchandising and find the optimum way to maximize the space within your store. But then from a shrink point of view, we can start to think about, how do I minimize the entry and exit points to the checkout front end? Where do I position my staff? Where do I position security? And where do I position things like signage? All of this has a major effect on the shrink levels at your front end, because if you can operationalize the front end in the right way, you can make it a very vigilant area, and you can make it very difficult for people to steal at the self-service checkout. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you some kind of do's and don'ts. So I think the natural way that retailers, particularly if they're trying self-service for the first time, is to take out vertical lanes and to replace them with a vertical orientation of self-service checkout. It seems the most natural and the smallest departure for customers in terms of their journey through the front end. But what that creates is multiple entry points and multiple exit points. So from a staffing point of view, it's a lot harder for them to be more vigilant of what's happening with the customers if there are malicious customers that are looking to deliberately steal, but also if there's unmalicious theft happening from customers that just maybe might not understand the process or how to use self-service checkout properly. So from a visualization point of view and being able to look at what customers are doing, it's a lot harder. But also from an operational point of view, it's adding more barriers between the customer and the member of staff, because they have to walk around technology or they have to see over the top of technology to see what's happening within the store. So rather than this vertical layout, what we really suggest to retailers, as you'll see on the next slide, is to lay out the self-service checkout in a horizontal type pen type layout. Now, this does a couple of things. Number one, it minimizes the entry and exit points to one. So you can much more easier track customers coming in and out, particularly if you do have those malicious theft transactions. You get great visibility for the attendant. So the attendant can stand in the middle. They can see very, very easily every single self-service checkout. They can see what the customers are doing, if there's any suspicious behavior, but also if there is genuinely customers that maybe need a bit more assistance or there's interventions, they can get to them really, really easily and really, really quickly. It also creates a lot less confusion for customers because they have a defined entry point. They can see what tills are open and available, and they can see their exit point. So getting the operations in the store is really, really important. And we use that tool as a way of experimenting with different layouts within the store in a virtual environment, so that when we actually put the solutions into the store, we're more confident that they're going to work, and you're going to get the maximum amount of adoption, but also we can keep shrink to a minimum. And we've got a great use case with a retailer who's actually seen shrink drop in their stores by about 1.5 to 2% because of the way that they've operationalized their store. So a great success story for self-service there. The second element that we're starting to bring into our self-service checkouts is the use of more bleeding edge technology. So security scales on self-service checkouts have been around for a long time now, but there's some emerging technologies that can't necessarily replace weight at the moment, but are certainly a supplement to it. And you'll see on the next slide some of the different options that we're experimenting with, not necessarily as a replacement for weight security scales at the moment, but in the short term to supplement them with the view in the long term they may replace them. So the use of data science and video analytics, so using AI learning and machine learning, deep machine learning, artificial intelligence to actually look at the processes at the front end and the items that are being processed, and actually track the processes as they go through the store. So you can identify if there's areas of shrink within the store. So it may be a malicious customer where they are intending to steal, but it may also be an unmalicious theft. For example, an item has been left in the trolley by accident. And using cameras and AI technology, we can actually identify those scenarios and then use a member of staff, the tablet-based technology, to step in and actually deal with that situation. Similarly, computer learning and video analytics, we can use that to actually track the items that are going through the store. And I think everyone knows of examples of or stories where customers have selected onions and put a bottle of wine on the scale, using video analytics to actually identify the item to stop that from happening. But similarly as well, we see a lot of theft by sweethearting with the involvement of the store staff within the store as well. So being able to capture that with video analytics and stop it from happening at the self-service checkout. So our recommendation for retailers that are worried about shrink is, if you have the right solutions in the store for your customers, if you apply the right innovation to those self-service checkout to help capture any shrink that does happen, but more importantly, if you operationalize those solutions in the right way, you can actually drive shrink down in your stores with the deployment of self-service checkout. Okay. So the next topic, we're going to talk about how to mix assisted self-checkout and self-service to transform your in-store experiences. I'm going to pass back over to George, and he's going to talk through some market data.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So this was work actually that we did for somebody around people's changing behavior. Now, it's absolutely true that the reason why people don't do so many of those large shopping trips anymore is because they're eating in a different way. They're snacking. And one of the things that I just wanted to bring out here is that actually when you look at what's really growing very fast, it's actually fresh. Unfortunately, you can't see it very well on this slide. It's the light green slide with the white writing on it. But you see, actually, this fresh, which read that as cool. So this cool snacking is growing at 8%, is growing enormously. And when you think that, generally speaking, grocery isn't growing that much, that tells you something. That tells you that there's going to be a lot more frequent shopping trips, and that these aren't really people buying stuff to take home. They're buying it to take to the office, take to the golf course, take to the beach. They're eating on the hoof. So the point about this is it tells you something's changing. These perimeter categories, by the way, really are the ones that drive grocers' profit as well. So they're very keen on, let's say, being able to help people to buy this easily and to check out quickly, because it's not their weekly shop. Let's go on to the next one. And I pulled this actually out of a large international retailer's briefing to its shareholders. One of the things that I wanted to point out here is, notice that 60% of their customers are looking at local brands and fresh products. What does that mean? It's increasingly the need to, let's say, manage this in a way that, again, helps that customer to choose what they want, but to check out quickly. And that means we have to be really, really good with our self-checkout and need to be really spot on in terms of being able to weigh and label this local merchandise, because it's not going to be packaged. It's not going to come perhaps already labeled and already with a barcode. So the reason I put that in there is that also has a huge implication. And this particular retail chain operates in 36 different countries. For them, is one of the things that's driving what their retail estate looks like. Let's go on to the next one. So what does that really mean? It means, well, yes, there's a rise in convenience, as well as convenience stores, but convenience generally. It means fewer and much higher value basket items. I should say these fresh items have much more margin and a higher value generally. And it means more frequent, but much more local shopping trips. And that has an implication for what kind of retail estate we need to run, how much self-checkout we need. Let's go on to the next one. This is why many of you will have seen already that supermarkets, I talked about convenience. Convenience is something inside every store. And I've talked a lot about food, but this goes exactly the same for non-food as well. So we see this in general merchandise too. And generally speaking, they're hybridizing. They're having some point of sale, which suits some segment of the market, but we're seeing some self-checkout as well. And what's the mix depends on what kind of people are shopping there and when. So we need to do that. We need the treasure map. We need the analytics that Matt already talked about. Let's go on to the next one. And so very frequently, we'll see now stores which are multi-format. So in this particular one, which happens to be one in Denver, it's both a grocer and a C-store, and it's a restaurant as well. And incidentally, this is another thing we didn't talk about. It's also doing click and collect or buy online, pick up in store. So it's generating, in this case, a third of its revenue online. Now, that also means that we need to think about how we organize our point of sale and self-checkout estate so that it accommodates that pickup in store as well. Let's go on to the next one.
Okay.
So Matt, perhaps you'd like to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you've touched on some really important points there, and I think namely the shopping habits and shopping trends are changing. As you said, consumers are shopping much more frequently now. In some cities, particularly in urban environments, consumers may be visiting a store 4 or even 5 times a week, buying a small number of items, but obviously visiting that store more frequently. So obviously that's great from a retailer's perspective because you have so many more instances to interact with that consumer. You also have so many more instances where you can try and upsell and maximize that basket spend with that particular consumer. But if you get the experience wrong in a store, it's delivering that bad experience 3, 4, 5 times rather than just the one time. So it's really, really important to get the checkout mix right. Consumers typically, once they finish shopping and they head to the checkout area, their number one goal is to get out as quickly as possible. So it's really, really important that you have the right combinations of solutions in your store that's going to enable the quickest throughput of your front end for your particular consumers. So a quicker checkout, fast and easy to use. So using the easiest and quickest workflows, innovation to reduce interventions, and more importantly, enable consumers to take control of the transaction. Let them choose what technology they want to use in their store and the level of staff interaction that they want to check out and process their items. So 3 trends that are kind of pushing self-service checkout. And on the next slide, you're going to see a summary of some consumer trends, some of the feedback that we collect from our retail customers and their consumers in terms of the perception of self-service checkout and their propensity to use it. So our research said that 66% of consumers like self-service, which is a great figure. And if you think about the perception of self-service checkout of old, that potentially that machine could be taking away the role or the job of a member of staff that they may know and see every single week, that's a huge perception shift to actually consumers realizing that that machine, that self-service checkout, is there to actually free up that member of staff to be more efficient to deliver the right customer experience to them. And it empowers them because it gives them the ability to shop and check out in the way that they want. So that's a great fact. The next one, 53% of shoppers prefer self-service checkout over traditional tills. So there is a perceptual shift that self-service checkout is quicker than using a man lane. In reality, the transaction might be slightly slower because a trained member of staff is always going to be more efficient at scanning than a customer. But the reality is you can put more self-service checkouts into a smaller space. That means you have more checkout capacity. So although the transaction might be slightly slower, actually the end-to-end time is quicker because there'll be less queues. And I think that's reflected in the final figure, which is 77% of shoppers would be very or somewhat comfortable in a retail setting if they only had self-service technology as an offering. And I think that's probably a really pivotal figure there that shows the amount of perceptual shift that we've seen in regards to self-service checkout amongst consumers. Okay, so what should you do now?
Okay, so I showed you earlier on that point of sale is actually a top investment priority. And when I say point of sale, it's really the whole path to purchase. So it includes self-checkout. And what's that really all about? It's about putting the basket right at the middle of the experience so that people can manage their own basket. Increasingly, of course, they might be doing some of their shopping, maybe starting the basket at home, maybe transfer it to mobile device, maybe transfer it to an associate, maybe to a self-checkout device when they get into the store. So that kind of thing is really what retailers are thinking about and building a different type of experience. Let's go on to the next slide. And in order to do that, a large number of them are thinking about how much more digital should the store become. So they're building a kind of a platform that understands a lot of different data. So yes, of course, about the customer, might recognize the customer, certainly understands the item, but I might also pull in other data, perhaps third-party recommendation data. Now, Matt pointed out, if people are coming into your store maybe 5 days a week for a quick shop, that's 5 times a week that you have an opportunity to interact with them and perhaps to have automated recommendations or automated help for them. And not just automated, because you've freed up people who are able to help them in person. And incidentally, with the clients that we work with, that's the number one thing that they talk about. They talk about taking people away from a dull and repetitive job and enabling them to relate to people as people. Let's go on to the next one. So we see this working really in 3 stages. So there's a foundation stage, which is about getting the technology right. So understanding exactly what should be the mix and how should you deploy it exactly the way that Matt talked about. Number 2 is about beginning to integrate and simplify that shopping and buying. And we've talked about how important it is for the consumer to be able to shop their way and to make their own choice. The 3rd stage is where we move to a more experiential shopping. And you'll have heard lots of people talk about the fact it's not about let's say a transaction, it's about an experience. And that's really where these in-store analytics and where new technologies, and Matt talked about some of them, are really beginning to change the experience of that customer. But the self-checkout is really the foundation of it. Let's go on to the next slide. So ultimately, you build up something which enables you to create this contextual experience. So you've got the technology foundation, there are operational efficiencies. We talked a lot about that, freeing up people from less productive work to doing more productive work, and then creating more data out of this. Remember how people wanted to get more data about their customers, and in particular to get it from the payment. And finally, out of that, creating a much more contextual experience. And we talked already about sensors and cameras. Those cameras and the sensors, they're creating a different type of experience, an Amazon Go experience, if you like, but actually it could be an Amazon Go plus experience with yet more data brought in there and yet more help from the people that we've freed up. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay. I'm going to hand back to Matt to explain how he's going to do this.
Thank you, George. So when we embark on any self-service checkout project with a customer that's new to self-service, we get a variety of different motivations for wanting to put self-service into the store. Some recognize that they need to reduce the operational costs of their stores, and they see self-service as a good way of doing that. Others are really focused on how do I deliver a heightened level of customer experience in my store. And some retailers are really just embarking on it because their competitor does it, or they've seen other stores within the market do it and they feel like they shouldn't be left behind. But what we really try to focus on is 4 main areas. Number 1, what's your goal? So why are you looking to deploy the technology? What issues are you looking to solve with it within the store? How does that fit with your long-term IT roadmap? And how can we support this vision? If we can understand the goals of what you're trying to achieve by putting the technology into your store, we've automatically got a KPI that we can measure the success of the solution against. If you're trying to, for example, reduce queues, and that's your number one goal, we can build the right solution set for your particular stores to try and reduce the queue. So understanding what you're trying to achieve is really, really important as a first step. The second is really, what's the long-term vision for your stores? And we work a lot with different retailers on their IT roadmaps, building out the technology steps to get them to whatever euphoric state they want in terms of the experience within their stores. And George, you mentioned Amazon Go as an example there. We've got a lot of retailers that say, well, you know, Amazon Go has come along, but it's a huge jump for us in terms of the technology that we currently have in store and the technology associated with Amazon Go, but also it's a huge departure for our consumers. So how do I make that jump? How do I make that, how do I bridge that gap between the technology I have now and a future technology that I've identified? And what we really say is it's about taking the consumers on an iterative journey. You can't put an Amazon Go type solution, well, you could, but it's likely that you're going to get a lot of pushback from consumers because it's too much of a departure from their current customer journey. So actually taking the customers on an iterative customer journey with a defined roadmap that almost drip feeds the technology into your stores and builds on it is going to make sure that your customer adoption stays high. So it's really important to understand what your long-term vision is. What does good look like for you in your store? More importantly, what does good look like for your consumers? And the example that I always use is, you know, is it a discount store where consumers shop there because they're price conscious, but they know that necessarily the customer experience may not be the highest compared to say a luxury brand where the consumers are paying a lot more and they're expecting a lot more? Making sure that you tailor not only the technology, but how you operationalize that technology in your stores to match the customer experience and the customer expectations is going to guarantee that no one comes away with a bad experience. And ultimately, what's your long-term roadmap? Or where do you want your stores to be in 5 years' time? And how do we work on building that iterative roadmap to get you there so it's less of a jump for your consumers? The third point is really to understand what pain points do you currently have in your store. So what do you currently see your friction points in your store? And quite a lot of this we can actually ascertain from the data analytics, where we can understand staff utilization or staff efficiency or lane utilization or lane throughput. We can actually start to pick out some of the friction points, but I think most people know what friction points they have in their stores and what's inhibiting a good experience within their stores. That might be operation, it might be IT, it may be just operational issues within the store. It may be how you staff your stores. It may just be the technology that you currently have in your stores is old and maybe doesn't match the expectations of what your customer is expecting. So we try and kind of identify all of these areas so that we can engineer out any blockers that are stopping you from progressing. And then finally, it's about making sure that whatever technology is going to be right for you fits well into how you run your stores and what your IT roadmap is. So we look at your hardware life cycle, we look at your software life cycle, we look at, for example, how many software drops you put into your estate per year, and we try and dovetail the deployment of that technology into your normal day-to-day operations so that it doesn't break your systems and it's not a massive departure and it adds a load of cost and extra resource to, for example, the IT team for implementation. So we try and really dovetail the solutions into your roadmap so that it's as seamless as possible. And then finally, the last kind of slide I want to leave you with on this is really where we see self-service checkout evolving within the market. So there's a lot of industry dynamics that are forcing a technology shift or technology requirement shift in stores. This is driven by the need for more cost efficient stores, but also customer experience and getting that customer experience right. And I always say that customers, once they've had a good experience, that becomes their baseline for all their shopping habits. So once you deliver a good customer experience, you've got to keep bettering that to keep ahead of the customer expectations. So how can we help you deliver on this? So number one is delivering against that heightened customer experience. So we look to try and provide smart and intuitive self-service checkout processes and technologies that create a seamless checkout experience for the consumers. We continually try to drive flexibility into our solution roadmap so that you're not left with an aging estate in 10 years' time that's not suitable for the market. And you can change and adapt with a modular type approach your checkout mix within your stores, but also build a defined innovation roadmap. So you've continually got new innovation coming into the product portfolio to keep ahead of those consumer experiences and to deliver more and more efficient staff and operations within the store, and make sure that you're continually developing the technology you have. The second is really to provide the greatest solution modularity. So we try and provide the most open and modular and configurable software platform with flexible workflow management, user interface, etc. So you can take on a lot of the management of the development of the solution yourselves, but you can also plug in different technologies via open APIs, and if there's particular technologies that you want to combine with your checkout mix. And then finally, modular and scalable hardware solutions. So really moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach. And this is really where we use the analytics model to work out what the most optimum checkout mix is for your stores, and then provide that checkout mix. So each store has a tailored technology program that fits the trading profile or the customer expectations for that particular store. And then finally, it's about delivering on TCO. So a big part of that analytics tool is really on how do we build a business case for self-service checkout. So the combination of the modular solution range is going to mean that you've got a right fit approach for your technology for each one of your stores, but also via our services organization. We've got a global delivery model, which means we can make sure that your lanes are up and operational for as maximum time possible, and to deliver on your TCO with committed availability services. So, you know, these are just three pillars of our strategy where we're continually trying to evolve our strategy to keep up with consumer demands, but also the pressures that retailers are under in terms of cost and operation. So that's really the three modules for our strategy. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, George?
No, I think that was fine. Thanks.
Fantastic. Okay, so the next thing that we just want to cover, so there will be a poll for this. So in a minute, you should see a polling card pop up. We will be offering tailored store tours in 5 cities across EMEA. So 2 in London, 1 in Paris, 1 in Madrid, 1 in Venice, and 1 in Dusseldorf. And these tours are really designed to give you a kind of immersive tour of different in-store experiences. So our consultants that work with retailers on a daily basis will be leading these store tours. They've got a huge amount of experience in the analytics model, but also working with different retailers globally on their checkout experience, their tilling mixtures, and their customer journeys. So they will lead these tours. We have a defined set of stores in each one of the tours where you can see different deployments of different technologies in different retailers. We talk about obviously what technology has been deployed. We talk about why it was being deployed, what they were trying to solve within the stores, and what the result of that technology was. So it's a great example of how you can see how different retailers have deployed different technology to solve some of those business issues that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So if any of you do want to take part in any of these store tours, I believe there's a poll that will be popping up. You should see it on screen now. That allows you to say yes. If you click yes and you do want to be involved, your local representatives will reach out to you, and they will organize the store tours with one of our local consultants. Okay.
Thanks so much, Matt. I did launch the poll, so we'll just give folks a few seconds to go ahead and respond. While you're doing that, I would just like to remind you, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A feature. We have saved a few minutes here at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So go ahead and type those in the Q&A now. Also, another reminder that tomorrow we will be sending out an email that does include a link to download this presentation, all of the slides, and also we will have a link to the recorded session available So if there's anyone in your organization that wasn't able to participate live, you're able to share this link with them and they can participate and listen in at their convenience. I'll go ahead and close the poll now, and we will look at some questions. So gentlemen, we did have a question come in here wondering what are some of the key tactics that retailers can use to improve consumer adoption of self-checkout?
George, do you want me
I'll
to
have
take
a
that
go
one?
at that.
Yep, you go.
I'll have a go. I mean, I think actually Matt already talked a bit about it. What you really need to do is to provide, let's say, a fast track for people who use self-checkout, because the people who will want to use it will be the people who are in a hurry. I want to just pick something up and scan and go. So you will often see, and I think we talked about that, you'll see perhaps a store with multi-format, and they'll have a special area which is, let's say, for people who are just picking up a few small items and need to get out in a hurry. So that's what I've seen work.
Absolutely. I'll just add to that I think there's a common misconception that if you put self-service into a store, it will be used. The kind of old adage of build it and they will come. And actually the approach to deploying self-service checkout is fundamentally different to putting point of sale into your store. So self-service checkout changes so many processes within your store in terms of how you staff your stores, how you operate them, things like your cash management process, how you interact with your consumers, how your consumers interact with your staff. So it's a fundamental change in so much in your stores that I try and consider it more as a business change solution than a point of sale solution. And what's really, really important is that you get the buy-in of your staff from the outset. So the communication and the marketing, the messaging that you deliver to your staff to say that self-service is coming, what you're trying to achieve by putting it in, and the fact that it isn't there to take away their jobs is really, really important, because ultimately, when you put self-service in and you take staff away from the front end, the members of staff that are there are really the ones that will deliver the consumer experience to those customers. They're the ones that will help the consumers use the units if they don't know how to use it or they're not particularly familiar. They're the ones that will communicate why the self-service checkouts have gone into their store. So it's really important that that messaging via your staff to your consumers is a positive one, and you demonstrate to them the value that it's going to bring to their shopping journey. So getting the staff buy-in and getting that marketing and that communication is really, really important to getting the right level of utilization of self-service checkout.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We have another couple of questions that have come in. Matt, I think I'm going to direct this one to you. The question is, when we implement self-checkout system, what scope can we cover? For example, point of sale hardware, software, integration, maintenance, etc.
So from a Diebold Nixdorf perspective, we like to think of self-service checkout and point of sale as touch points, and we cover pretty much all of them. So we consider self-service and point of sale as the two major touch points within your store. And self-service really covers the self-service checkout hardware. It could be mobility, could be kiosk, it could be seasonal tilling. So we provide all of the point of sale, all of the touch points from a hardware perspective. We also can provide all of the software that sits on all of those touch points. So both from a self-service perspective, but also from a point of sale and back off perspective, we have software solutions for both of those areas. We have professional services teams that will deliver and implement the self-service checkout in terms of integration into your back office or your existing point of sale solution, and also maintenance. So we have a great services organization, and they cover everything from installation of devices into your stores, right through to break fix, to help desk, to remote management, to predictive maintenance. So we have the full suite of hardware, software, and services, depending on what you actually require.
Thanks, Matt. And just as a follow-up to that, who can implement checkout systems? Is it our team? Do we use a partner or a global delivery team, which I believe you mentioned on one of your slides?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a mixture of implementation models. So we have both direct and indirect. So from the direct perspective, we have global delivery teams from a consultancy perspective to help you work out what the right mix of solutions is, but also from a integration and actually a physical delivery into your labs or to your stores, and integration into the stores as well. And we have global teams locally in each country that provide those kind of services. And we also have a quite an extensive partner model. So we've got literally hundreds of partners all over the world that can deliver and implement our solutions into particular countries if we don't have a direct presence, or it's into a segment that we don't focus on. So we have both direct and indirect.
Thanks, Matt. And we are at the top of the hour, so I'll just ask both Matt and George for any closing statements. Any questions we weren't able to get to live, we will follow up post-webinar, so we will get in touch with you with any questions that were not answered today. George, Matt, any final closing statements before we end today's call?
Only for me to say, remember the treasure map.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
And I would echo that and say that, you know, try and do as much work ahead of touching your stores in terms of working out the right solution mix, understanding the treasure map for your stores and identifying the right solutions for your customers, and operationalize it in the right way. And you can make sure that it will be a success when you put it in.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen, both. We really appreciate you taking the time to deliver today's presentation. And I'd also like to take the time to thank everyone on the call today. We appreciate you spending your valuable time with us. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.